This is Coder Radio, episode 313 for June 14th, 2018. Welcome to Coder Radio, Jupiter Broadcasting's weekly talk show, taking a pragmatic look at the art and business of software development and its related technologies. This episode is brought to you by our two fine sponsors, DigitalOcean and Linux Academy. I'll tell you more about those sponsors as this show goes on, but our host is established in the stormy bayous of Florida. It's Mr. Dominic. Hello, Mike.
Greetings from Thor's apartment.
Yeah, it really is the hammer of thunder over there. You might hear a little bit in the background from time to time. Apparently, it's the apocalypse in Florida. Are you going to be okay? Are you going to survive this?
If I don't, I'll get eaten by alligators. So it's very green, very ecologically efficient.
Yeah, it is the circle of life. Well, Mr. Dominic, we have a great show. So we're going to get to our traditional follow-up and feedback. And then later on in the show, the CEO of GitLab is going to join us. Sid Sijbrandij will come on and he'll talk about GitLab and what they're doing and some new things that are in the work. And I think it's going to be a fascinating chat in light of recent news. But before we go, there's some things that I have to give Mike a hard time about. Some traditional follow-up here on the show. And probably to keep things continuous, continuity, I suppose. We should start with a follow-up on last week's episode where Mr. Dominic had a strong reaction to Apple's WWDC, but you had a chance to sit down, read some of the docs, and burn everything to the ground.
Yeah, I still think the videos are terrible. I just want to put that front and center. But what I was impressed with when I actually got to look at some of the session videos and the docs really was ARKit 2. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if I'm impressed with Metal. I find it intriguing that they're deprecating OpenGL in favor of Metal. Did you catch that little
yeah. Oh yeah, there? I did. Oh yeah, I caught that. I definitely caught that. Yeah, I'm really torn on that because Metal does seem like it lets developers accomplish some really great stuff, but at the cost of industry standardization.
Right, which is weird because they're really doing all they can to make Swift like not an Apple language, right? To make it it's an open source standard. But on the graphics side, Metal is completely proprietary.
Yeah. OpenGL never has been great on the Mac platform.
Is that Apple's fault or... Yes, it is actually. Never mind.
I think so. It's hard to say. But yeah, so Metal aside, ARKit, yeah, I agree. I think actually the Mac got some of the best stuff in this last round. There's no good Mac hardware, but that's a separate issue.
That's a separate issue. I mean, I actually updated my MacBook Pro to Mojave. What you have to say with the little...
Oh, you did? Really? You rolled the dice, huh?
I rolled the dice. It's dark mode looks terrible on apps that aren't ready for it. Shocker. But the updates to Xcode are really, really nice, particularly if you are in any way an Xcode user. Check out the session video for LLDB and new debugging tools. There's a lot of just cool stuff added to Xcode. Now, if you've ever used a JetBrains IDE or Visual Studio proper, you'll be like, okay, so this is features that they should have had 5 years ago. But the fact that they have them now is really good. In particular, just the command line interface on the console in Xcode is just awesome. It's really catching up. I understand from the technical session what they're doing with the whole machine learning and kind of the machine learning. I remember we talked about the machine learning on the iMac Pro potentially using Swift to train your models. I now get what they mean that for. You are not going to build a giant backend service that's like an AI assistant. What you might build though is a little help, like a help function or some other kind of tangential or additional functionality into an app on an Apple platform. And if that's all you're doing, if machine learning and AI, and I'm starting to hate the term machine learning because apparently everything is machine learning now, this is a not so painful path, except for the big thing that I know Chris is going to jump all over. The hardware is just, you would not do this, right? You would not generally want to train machine learning models on any of the common Mac hardware today. I mean, maybe an iMac Pro, sure.
And you wouldn't really expect the story to be, well, use an eGPU. Oh, and we'll get NVIDIA. Yeah, we'll get NVIDIA working in there. But for now, just use an eGPU. That's not really the answer. And the answer also can't be buy an iMac Pro. And the thing is, the iMac Pro is now damn near 200 days old. So even their newest machine is old. That is not competitive. And so they want to get into this VR, AR. They want to get into machine learning. They want people to look at Mac OS Mojave as a professional workstation. They got to close the gap on the hardware. They got to fix the MacBook keyboard, and they got to get newer, cost-effective machines out that developers can start to experiment with. They almost have to go back a little bit to their roots when they were trying to convince developers to come over to the Mac again. And so the reason why I thought WWDC was decent is because I could see the groundwork. I could see the software groundwork being laid. I don't see any hardware suggestions or hints, but that's not necessarily indicative of anything. But that's why I thought, doesn't really impact my day-to-day life, not going to change how I do work, but if I use the Mac platform and iOS to an extent, because their automation stuff with their workflow version of shortcuts, I think is powerful. So if I followed that platform closely or was looking forward to improvements to that platform, I would consider I got something at least of value out of WWDC. If they don't answer it, though, with a hardware component soon, it's still half the story.
Yeah, I would even add, too, that if you're not like a graphics development person, which I am not, though I'm having to learn more Metal than I would like, Metal is actually kind of the unsung hero of this WWDC, I think, when you look at the technical docs. For instance, core animation, which is, if you don't know, it's a high-level framework. Basically, a common pattern, let's say, would be, animation with duration, blah, blah, blah. Here's a C block with your animation. That's obviously the Objective-C syntax. What would happen in the past is that would be a core animation call, which would call into the core animation API, which in turn would actually call into OpenGL for you. So you needed no knowledge of OpenGL, and it did it for, it's just like Grand Central Dispatch.
Don't worry about that.
Right, Grand Central, it's an abstraction, right? Just like Grand Central Dispatch is and was an abstraction over threading.
Yep.
Core animation is now not calling into OpenGL, is my understanding. It's calling directly into Metal, which does seem to have some significant performance increases. I think going forward, particularly if you're looking at AR solutions, the investment of learning Metal, which is a pretty, I've been doing some research into it, thick and juicy piece of API, is probably going to pay off big time. And of course, there was a little carrot for me that I didn't know about it.
Oh, what was it?
Improvements to God's one true programming language.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
Objective-C got some
quietly been getting improvements. I love it.
That's good. You know what? That must be because there's still some diehards in Apple that are using it, right?
There's got to be one guy like me saying, "I don't care. What's that Swift for? Get it out of here."
I love it. You know what? Maybe it was a birthday present to you because rumor has it you and Donald Trump share similar birthday weeks. So happy birthday,
mine was
Mr.
yesterday.
Yeah, and Trump's is today. So you and Donald get together, have a little birthday party this weekend, and Apple gave you a gift, and that was some modest improvement to Objective-C. What was it in particular?
It's just some basically better interop with Swift. A few more. They've been getting it the whole time, but a few. Yeah, I know. It's a lot of it has to do with interoping with Swift and being able to not be completely foreign. I mean, the reality of the situation is if you're starting a new iOS app, you probably should just do it in Swift. Although there was a great post I read, and I completely agree, and we should have put it in the show notes, but I forgot.
Oh.
Where Objective-C is the one true programming language. And my favorite part, compared to Swift, is that I didn't have to write this post. So see, I'm not the only one.
Yeah, speaking of people that are writing posts for us, just kind of tangentially related to what we were just talking about, Rogue Amoeba, long-time, really high-quality Apple software developers that have made third-party apps for the Mac for ages, have released a post today called "On the Sad State of Macintosh Hardware," and they basically lay it out there that it's devastating to them that there is so much Mac hardware that's out of date that they're seriously concerned as a Mac software shop. And if you look at the Mac Rumors buying guide, every machine is essentially a don't buy, with the exception of the iMac Pro, which is marked as a neutral. And just for
it's a $5,000+ neutral.
Yeah. And for note, the Mac Mini today, 1,337 days old. That's how long ago it was updated. The Mac Pro's been more than a year, 436 days. MacBook Pro, also more than a year, 374 days. The MacBook Pro hasn't been updated for 374 days. And they say it's very difficult to recommend the current crop of Macs to customers, and that's deeply worrisome to us as a Mac-based software company. For our internal needs, we wound up purchasing and used hardware for testing rather than optimizing to compromise heavily on a new machine. This isn't good for Apple, nor is it what we want. So I thought we should just mention that in the light of WWDC, there's still huge problems, and now it's the hardware stuff. And so that's the reality of that. And it's not just us that's bitching about it. It's other people.
No, it really isn't. I mean, I was actually pretty surprised that they didn't at least like spec bump at least the iMac Pro, thinking, you know what, this is your one really viable, you know, contender to say like the high-end Dells and you know, basically everybody else, right? HP has high-end machines, Dell has high-end machines, but they didn't do it, like nothing. So it seems...
I was recently just shopping here, you know, because Linux Academy is putting in an OBS system, and it's like, well, what do we use? You know, what is the go-to high-end PC that's guaranteed to work with Linux? And, you know, I run through all the usual suspects, and there's different compromises with each set. And it's we've reached a point now where the Mac isn't even a consideration. Well,
yeah, I mean, we're doing the show right now 100% on Linux, right? I'm on POP, and you're on... What do you want still? KDE?
Kubuntu 1804, all the way, baby.
1804, yeah.
Rocking it on all the machines. All the machines we're routing through audio, all on Kubuntu, end to end. So, yeah, it is... Speaking of remote, I am remote this week. I'm at Texas. I think I mentioned I'm at Linux Academy. I'm just outside of the Fort Worth area. And I have been exposed now pretty heavily this week to a company that believes pretty deeply in remote work. I'd say about half their staff, maybe more, maybe as much as 60%, 70% of their staff are remote at Linux Academy. And they've, for competitive reasons and all kinds of reasons, including some people just work better that way. You and I have gone back and forth on this, because I've been working remote now since May 27th. I have been on the road since May 27th doing all of the shows and running the business remotely. And then coming here to Linux Academy. This is my last stop before I start the long haul home. And it's really given me perspective on this remote work thing. And so if it didn't make me smile, I don't know what would. Yesterday, Mr. Dominic tweets, @ChrisLAS is going to have a lot of fun making fun of me on the next Coda Radio because I've already given up the on-site work thing. So, Mr. Dominic, here we go. John Kerry of the remote work flip-floppers. Flipping and flopping on the remote work. And I want to know what happened, because you were going all in. I mean, you had an office building you were going down with. You had people there on site.
Yeah.
You had an air conditioning machine making ticking noises in the background. Tick, tick, tick. You were all in.
Yeah, people will be pleased that won't be too common anymore. You know, it's funny because I flip-flopped on this a few times, and it's always for the same reasons, right? What occurred to me in this latest adventure is that limiting yourself to one physical location creates all kinds of weird logistical problems where being remote doesn't. And people really, especially developers, really don't do their best work, you know, chained to a desk 9 to 5 every day.
Boy, if that hasn't been an adjustment for me, because I've been working at a desk setting up a machine, and I hear a lot of different conversations around me, and I have really lost my ability to tune that out.
Right. And you know, the problems I thought I was solving by going on site are actually solved in a much perhaps more brutal way. Like if someone screws something up, you should just fire them, like immediately. Where, you know, remote, because remote requires, and I think this is going to be something that some people are going to have a hard time with, it requires a level of kind of self-accountability and self-management that maybe some folks don't have. Okay. But the reality is someone who's like a bad dev is going to be a bad dev on-site or off-site, right? There's no difference. And maintaining a site is just expensive.
Yes.
Now, it's one thing to have like a small space, to have like an office if you need to meet a client or, whatever. But every time you hire someone, you need more desks, more, obviously remote employees, you're still buying them computers generally. But it's just like the ongoing process of growing becomes incredibly costly with the space. And it doesn't seem, how can I put this?
It's not money spent on the core product in a way.
It's not money spent well. And the advantages of having a centralized location, I'm in Plant City, Florida right now. Tampa or Orlando, Florida would be different to have an office, but the cost would be at least double. And that's just to be part of that community and whatever, but everything's more expensive, right? It's like before we were in New Jersey, an office in Manhattan may have been more beneficial, but like would have been like 10 times as much.
Yeah.
So when you're small, I've come to the realization that your main strength is actually flexibility. And being tied down to one address is not flexible. I'll be clear, what I'm saying is it's not that... Go ahead.
No, go finish it up, because I follow what you're saying. It's like being small, you have that dynamic flexibility. You can pivot, you can make drastic changes and make big decisions. But when you add the cost of real estate or rent or just a contract, it slows you down there.
Exactly. And, I still see an advantage in having a small space that you can meet a customer at, do an event at. Like we're actually, I don't know if you know this, Chris, I tweeted this too, but you only get me on the gotcha tweets. The Mad Botter is now sponsoring the Plant City Software Development Meetup. So on the 21st, after work, we're having people over and we're catering coffee and a couple treats there.
Oh, shoot,
and in our office.
Days.
Yeah, on the 21st, in our offices in Plant City. So that should be, the Thursday, if that's 21st or 22nd, I'm not sure. That is one use for a space, right? It's good to have, if your team's still relatively local, you can have meetings. But the other reality is like, I don't know if you know this, the economy is really good right now and hiring people is like super hard. So saying you must work in Plant City, Florida is not super effective.
Yeah, okay. That's all fair. What I've noticed that Canonical and now Linux Academy seem to do is they do seem to drop some cash on like large meetup events or summits or sprints or whatever the companies happen to call them. And they bring people in and have them work together for intense periods of time. And then they go back and work remote. And they seem to do that a few times a year. What are your thoughts on something like that? Is that feasible in a smaller operation?
Well, I think the smaller you are, the more budget constrained you are. I could see a situation where you're renting like a shared office type of space, or indeed doing what I'm doing. You are keeping a small physical office. Then yeah, I could see that making sense, maybe once a quarter.
We should ask our guest about this. So why don't we bring on Sid Sijbrandij? He actually is a pretty big advocate for remote work, and I'd be curious how they do that at GitLab. So we'll get there, but let's get Sid. So without further ado, joining us on the line from GitLab, the co-founder and chief executive officer is Sid Sijbrandij. Sid, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
How'd I do on that pronunciation of the last name? I just kind of took a shot at it.
Good enough for me.
Well, thank you for being generous. I appreciate that. So, Sid, we've actually been wanting to chat with you forever because Mike is a GitLab user as part of his day-to-day business, but
awesome.
Obviously...
Thanks for that.
Well, thank you.
But with the recent... all the way.
Yeah. It's very popular with our audience. And so with the big news from Microsoft recently, we thought this would just be a great opportunity to chat with you. We were just talking about remote work, and so I want to get to there in a moment, but maybe we should just kind of back up a little bit. So GitLab is famous for being an open core company, and I thought if I recall, the first time I'd ever seen you talk about it, I thought I recalled you talking about GitLab as an open source company, and then I noticed sort of a tone change to an open core company. So would you kind of explain how the GitLab model works for us?
Yeah, for sure. So GitLab started as an open source project by my co-founder Dimitri in 2011, and we built a company around it. And we tried to finance that company in different ways. We tried donations, we tried consulting, we tried support contracts, but it all wasn't sustainable. And all the while, the popularity of the open source project was increasing. So there was more and more time going into release management, performance updates, bug fixes, all these things that you have to do. So we needed a better model. So we settled on licensed software. We introduced GitLab Enterprise Edition, which is paid and proprietary. And so we changed from saying we were open source to open core. There's both an open source edition and a proprietary edition of GitLab, and that's what open core means.
I see. Thank you. So the other off-the-wall question I had is it true, the rumors, that before you started GitLab, you were a recreational submarine company? Is that a true thing?
Yeah, it's a true thing. I was the first employee and incorporated a company that still makes the most submarines every year.
No kidding. That is the neatest little, like, I would love to, I didn't even know a personal submarine was something I could have. So
it's if you can have it trailerable, but it really is a bit expensive. It's about $2 million, and most people that own it have a large boat to store it on.
Sure. Boy, so there's things to aspire to, is what you're telling me. I like
For
that.
sure.
So I guess also when I was digging through sort of your background, it looks like you have some, or you used to at least have some love for Ruby.
Yeah, I used to be a Ruby on Rails developer.
Now, I won't hold that against you in any way as the show goes on. But I suppose these days, not much chance to do much Ruby?
No, it's I went from programming code to maybe programming some processes in the company. I do commit regularly to our handbook.
Oh, okay. So let's talk about the company for a little bit. So let's talk about GitLab. How big is GitLab now?
It's 300 people.
Holy smokes. The last number I saw was somewhere in the hundreds. That's amazing. So these last few weeks must have been pretty remarkable.
Yeah, it was amazing. After GitHub got acquired, we saw a lot of love for GitLab, a lot of people migrating, but especially a lot of people giving GitLab another look and really being amazed by where we've come since a few years ago.
I think both Mike and I really liked the messaging approach that GitLab had around the GitHub purchase. You guys really seemed on top of it, like almost like you were waiting for this to happen. Like you had that stuff up your sleeve, ready to pull out. Can you explain that a little bit to us?
There were rumors in the week before that they might have been acquired, and so we started preparing.
Working.
And
well,
I think we did well in the preparations. And
yeah,
over the weekend we saw people moving to GitLab, and it was great to see that response. I'm looking at a tweet here from Zach Calling, who tweets, "Okay, I get it. GitLab's product leapfrog GitHub. I'm shocked how incredibly nice, thoughtful, and well-designed it is. Fantastic built-in tools, incredible Kubernetes support, built-in CI/CD, security testing, project management, and support features. Moving to GitLab." That is really what we love to see. Not people moving because they're hating on Microsoft or GitHub, because I think Microsoft's going to do a good job being a maintainer of GitHub, but really moving because they like a single product for the whole DevOps cycle.
Yeah.
One thing that's very attractive for my company using GitLab is that we can host it ourselves. Do you see that as a competitive advantage for you, or is that kind of an offshoot of the main product, or do you see that as the main product?
Yeah, no, we have two products, or we have one product and two ways to consume it. Either you use our .com or you self-host it. But it's the self-hosting is a really important part, not in the least because it means you have that freedom. Even if you're using the .com, you always have an export button, and you can move to your own hosted instance or GitLabhost.com or somewhere else where you want to be.
Yeah. Now, back to the acquisition of Microsoft. When you heard that, when the rumors first started circulating, were you concerned? It seems like it takes essentially a competitor and sort of supercharges them with Microsoft's bank account.
Yeah, so they're going to have a bigger bank account. I think for us, the hardest thing will be that they'll have Microsoft's Salesforce. Like Microsoft speaks to a lot of companies. They
Sure.
regularly deal at the C-level in those companies, and they can now like add this additional offering to that to their bundles, and they're famous for having a good bundling strategy. So that's going to be harder for us. What's going to be better for us is that they're going to be focused on integrating with Microsoft and Azure and all those other things. And I think for us, we're going to go full steam ahead, and we'll keep releasing every single month and keep adding great features for the whole for that whole DevOps lifecycle.
Now, a little birdie tells me, speaking of some of those features, that there's something called Auto DevOps that's coming along, and I was wondering if you could share a little details about Auto DevOps.
Yeah, so we're really, really bullish on Auto DevOps. On a week from now, June 22nd, we'll release GitLab 11.0, and Auto DevOps will be generally available. And what you do is you just push your code, and GitLab does the rest. It will build your code, run your tests, check the quality, do static application security testing, dependency scanning, license management, container scanning. It will boot up a review app, kind of like a staging environment per merge request, dynamic application security testing, and deploy it. It will do browser performance testing, and it will do monitoring of all the vital metrics. So all of that just by pushing your code, nothing to configure. We think that is the future, and we're really excited about having it out to the world.
Yeah, that's great timings. That's coming pretty soon.
Yeah, in a week, the 22nd.
Oh, very neat. Well, I look forward to hearing about it or seeing about it when it launches. So, Auto DevOps, I'm not familiar. But it sounds like a fantastic addition. And top of that, haven't you? Go ahead, Mike.
No, I'm pretty deep into using the current continuous integration tools in the community edition of GitLab. Is there a breakpoint between Auto DevOps and the Enterprise edition? Or is that just everybody's getting that?
Everybody's getting Auto DevOps.
That's awesome. Okay.
The only thing is that the security features right now are in Ultimate Edition. So they're not part of the Community Edition. I think all the other things, maybe except the license management, is part of it. So you just push your code and you get your review app, you get the monitoring, everything.
So can we talk about the additions for a moment? Because I noticed that you've recently made, for open source projects and for schools, some of the high-end plans are free now. So can you talk a little bit about the reasoning behind that and what the different plans are? Because I'm a noob to this stuff.
Yeah, so we have a lot of universities using GitLab already, and we wanted to make sure that those the students, they train with all of our features. So when they go out into the workplace, they tell their new employer, like, why aren't you using all these awesome GitLab features that are available that many people are not yet aware of?
That's interesting. So it was a barrier for them.
It was a barrier. Universities don't have big budgets, so they're not like paying for software a lot. So we figured we just give this away. And also open source projects. Some open source projects like GNOME and Debian, they insist on using open source. So they switch to GitLab and they're using core. But some open source projects are pragmatic about whether they run on proprietary software. And for them, we want to make it easy for them to also use all those security features. We're passionate about open source, and we want to help them in any way we can. And there's different plans for GitLab. So there's a great core edition that's totally free, both if you download it or if you use private repos on GitLab.com. And we have 3 different tiers, from starter, which is $4 per user per month, all the way to ultimate, which is $99 per user per month.
So do you kind of see this as a type of contribution back to open source then?
So ultimate for free, we see that as a bit of a contribution, but what we don't want to give is the impression that we think this is an alternative to having a really great open source edition. We understand that there's lots of open source projects that only want to be based on open source, and we'll keep listening to GNOME and Debian and all the other projects who are in the process of switching. And we'll make sure that core will always be a great way to run an installation like that.
do you think that could be a market that starts to grow and maybe as a result in somewhat of this Microsoft purchase, that core group of open source developers who maybe have fairly large projects, but they do have that, I guess, moral ground, you might call it, where it has to be open source, but they need something that has enough features. Seems like there could be some contention there.
I don't think it's going to be a problem. I think Microsoft has shown it's a new company. They're not pulling the tricks of the past. I think that companies and organizations are contemplating a move to GitHub will not be phased. There are, however, a lot of big open source projects that say we're not going to go to someone else's software as a service ever. We want to be in control. We want to run our own website. And examples are like Ruby and the Apache Foundation and GNOME and Debian. And some of those are now moving to GitLab. And we think if you want to self-host, GitLab is the logical choice. And we want to stimulate that as much as we can.
Yeah, I was just fantasizing about some news announcement one day where the Linux kernel moves off of GitHub to a self-hosted GitLab instance. And I was trying to think of what would they need from a GitLab core to pull that off. And I wonder if everything is there yet. And would you be comfortable maybe contributing things to the open source version that haven't been there in the past to meet those needs if it meant a significant maybe set of projects might come over?
Yeah, we're open to that. I don't think the Linux kernel considers themselves hosted on GitHub at this moment. I think they're hosted on self-hosted Git, and they're sending patches by email. If they ever wanted to move to GitLab, we'd be very open to talking about open sourcing certain features. And with GNOME and Debian, it was the same. We open sourced certain features that they thought were absolutely essential.
That's a great point. Well put.
So how common is it? Go ahead first.
No, I was going to switch to remote work, but if you got more, keep going.
Yeah. How common is it for someone to switch from the open source edition that I'm currently on to I want to say proprietary, but to the paid edition?
Yeah, so far about 6% of the people have done that, and we think
6 or 60.
0.6. So only 5 to 6% have actually switched to a paid edition. And we see it increases as the organizational size increases and as they adopt more of the different features of GitLab. So, Mike, probably you're not switching yet because you might be a smaller organization. If you were using the same amount of features with like 1,000 people, I think it would be a no-brainer to switch to a paid edition.
And is that process, because we've done a few upgrades, we tested it out for a while. Is that process a pretty easy turnkey process? I'm thinking in particular because I know a lot of our listeners are independent development shops, consultants that maybe have 30, 40 people and are thinking about maybe it's time to step up to the ultimate edition.
Yeah, so it is a very easy process. It's either you just install the new packages and you import a backup. But if you've downloaded GitLab recently, you'll probably have Enterprise Edition by default with all the core features, but you have that installation, and then it's really a question of just entering a license key and you're done.
Oh, that's great. Okay.
Yeah, that is great. I like that. So Mike and I have had an on and off relationship with remote work. He and I both have small businesses, and we have a handful of contractors and employees, and we've really tried to experiment with this remote work, and we've had this ongoing multi-year conversation now with our audience about it, who are also experimenting. And so when I was kind of doing some research on you before the show, I saw several different talks where you sort of were a proponent of remote work. And you mentioned over 300 employees or staff. How many of those, roughly, if you can share, are remote? And can you share your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so 100% of our team members are remote, and we have people in 40 countries.
Wow. And I'm curious, do you supplement the remote work with like get-together events like summits or sprints where you bring people together and have teams working together for a bit and they go back home? How does that work?
We do a summit every 9 months, and we try to go to a nice location. Last one was in Crete in Greece, and the next one is in Cape Town, South Africa, and it's for a week. And we don't put you in a conference room for the entire week, but we try to go out and do things together.
Right, which legitimately is team building too.
Yeah, we think that if we're going to all that effort and expense to get together, we shouldn't do things that we could do remote, like watching a presentation. We should do things that you can only do in person, like visiting something together.
Yeah.
And it's all about getting to know your fellow team members and the members of the GitLab community. But like every 9 months is way too little. So what we also do is a lot of like structured social interaction. When you spend 1.5 hours every day driving to work or going to work, there at work you have kind of unstructured social interaction just by virtue of people walking around. They'll talk to each other. We don't have that, so we facilitate that. We have different things. We have things called virtual coffee breaks. We just schedule time on someone's calendar. They understand the concept, and you can talk about work, but you don't have to. It's kind of just chit-chatting.
What facilitates that conversation?
It's Google Calendar and Zoom.
Okay.
And everyone that joins the company has to start with 10 so that they get accustomed to it. We have a team call every day, and it's 5 minutes of announcements and then 25 minutes of people talking about their life outside of work. Sometimes it's about a certain subject. Today, we had breakout rooms. Suddenly, you're in a room with just a subset of the people. That's a great way to kind of get to know each other, get to know each other's hobbies.
Huh.
For people that have like GitLab people around them, we also like pay for them to organize a meetup. And if you want to go visit other GitLab team members, we pay for the travel that's involved.
Really? Wow. So there is a bunch of interesting ideas in there that I'd never considered. That daily call strikes me as almost borderline too much, though, like in terms of taking productivity. Is that something that is debated a lot, or have you found that you just stick to it and it works?
Yeah, I think you don't want to be too afraid of hurting productivity. What we always say is we don't monitor your hours, we monitor your results, and so we're not gonna force you to be in that call. It's optional, like almost every meeting at GitLab. If you don't want to be there, you don't have to be there.
Oh,
and if it's not interesting to you, it's totally fine to go do something else while you're logged into a meeting.
And that's a nice balance. I like that balance you've struck there. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah,
and then the other thing that go ahead.
Yeah, people new to GitLab sometimes say, "I'm going out for lunch," and everyone says, "Well, have a great lunch, but you don't have to tell us. Like you're the boss of your day. If you want to go to the gym during the day when it's quiet, or to the supermarket, that's the freedom of remote work, and you should embrace it."
Boy, that really does sound appealing. So the other thing you said in there that is a new concept, and it sounds expensive to me as a business owner, but I like it, is you'll pay for the travel if they want to go meet another team member. How does that work well? And people don't abuse that, and that's not a huge cost center?
It's not. So we pay for like the plane ticket. We pay a few $100s, and then when they're there, they sometimes rely on the hospitality of the other team members or connection they have to actually stay there.
That really gives me something new to think about. And what about the onboarding process? Getting somebody acquainted with the culture, how you work, some of these ideas. It seems like the onboarding process maybe would be the time where you'd want people together.
Yeah. So what's important is that you get to meet the other people that are also onboarding, because kind of you feel connected to them. So we do GitLab 101s, which are sessions where they ask questions to an executive. So it's not a presentation. It's just purely asking that executive questions. I do those, and every C-level exec does those. It's also about getting to know the people in the company. So those virtual coffee breaks really help there. And then for the rest, we just want to make it as efficient as possible. So you get an onboarding issue, and there's more than 100 checkboxes on that of all the things that have to happen. Most of it you have to do yourself, but also the work that other people have to do for you, adding you to systems, that's visible. So you can check whether it's still coming up or whether people have done that. And then we have a great handbook of over 1,000 pages that describes all the different processes in the company. You don't have to read all of that, but everything that relates to your function, you're expected to read. So you can onboard without having to bother people with a lot of questions.
Now, you say great handbook. Now, didn't you earlier say that you work on the handbook?
Yeah. So
you might be biased, Sid.
I'm very biased towards the handbook because we've seen it work.
That's a good idea. I like that idea. I'll admit, I've never thought about creating a handbook, but I could really see the usefulness of it, especially if you're bringing on a lot of people pretty fast.
Yeah, we're growing about 3x year over year. So it's really important that we can onboard new people. And people always say, look, I onboarded. And what was amazing was every time I had a question, people were so nice. And then I always think, yeah, that's because you have 10 times less questions because most things are documented already. So when there's few questions, it's easier to be receptive to them.
That makes a lot of sense. And, you know, as somebody who is just sort of getting acquainted with GitLab after the recent news, I've always been aware of it, but really getting acquainted now, that gives me a confidence in the long-term structure of the company. It sounds like there's a real process for scaling, bringing new staff on, and keeping that going without derailing the company, because that can be one of the hardest things with a company is bringing people on and getting that right. So I'm pretty positive about the future. You must be as well. You must be pretty positive about what at least the next few years have for GitLab.
Yeah, I'm super excited. This year we're going to complete our vision of complete DevOps. So it used to be that GitLab was just version control, and then it was just for developers. And now we're going to make sure that you can run the entire lifecycle all the way up to deploying to production and monitoring in GitLab. And we think that's going to bring so many advantages. Imagine you're pushing your code, it gets deployed, but then GitLab sees that you're breaching a service level objective. It automatically rolls back the code and says, hey, something went wrong here. Or overnight, there's like Debian has a security update. It gets rolled out automatically, but we monitor it. And if it doesn't work, we roll it back. So instead of babysitting deployments, you can do it all with GitLab. And super excited by what we're doing there. So
that's Auto DevOps, right? And that's going to be launching on June 22nd. That's next week.
Yeah, so one feature I mentioned is Auto Revert. That's not yet in GitLab, but that will be launching this year.
It just really strikes me as a way to empower even understaffed open source projects, people that are on GitLab now that maybe don't have all of the resources that larger projects might. This could help them get more done. So that's going to be a great feature.
Yeah, spend less time on your tooling, spend less time on babysitting changes, spend more time on actually creating functionality.
Yeah. Well, Sid, thank you very much for coming on. I'm sure these are very busy days for you. And so Mike and I both really appreciate you making time to come on the Coder Radio program.
Anytime. Thank you.
Thanks, Sid. Boy, that was great picking Sid's brain on the remote work stuff. I mean, very awesome hearing about GitLab and also very much looking forward to them launching Auto DevOps. But what do you think about his thoughts on the remote work stuff? Like, they 100% remote work.
You know what? I was a little cat got my tongue because I was thinking about what he was saying. I was like, can that really work? I might have to
try it.
Some of that stuff. You know what? Having the team meetups, it makes a ton of sense. And if they're growing, as he said, 3x year over year. It's scaled up to 300 people? That's incredible to me. That's great.
I'll put a link. He mentioned as we were saying goodbye that that handbook is open source. So I'm going to put a link to that in the show notes. So if you want to grab it, you can go to coder.show/313 and we'll have a link to their handbook that they've put in the show. But Mike, I think that's probably it right there. I think we should probably wrap it up. I'm going to be traveling with kids for the next weekends or so. So I don't really know what the recording schedule is going to be. So just the surefire bet is coder.show/subscribe. Mike and I will work it out over the next few days. But when we do publish an episode, as long as you go to coder.show/subscribe and subscribe from one of the ways there, you'll get every single episode that we put out. Mr. Dominic, where should people find you throughout the week?
Follow me at Dumanuka on Twitter.
Boom! You can follow me on Twitter. I'm at ChrisLAS, and follow my journey home from Tejas at jupiterbroadcasting.com/rover. Thanks so much for being here, and hopefully we'll see you right back here next week.